had always dreamed of this moment. I guess most girls do. The perfect proposal, the perfect fiancé, the perfect wedding. All of it wrapped in a pretty bow of happily ever after. I'd found the man I wanted to spend my life with, Cole. We met in college, and from the first moment we spoke, I knew he was the one. He had this charm, this easy smile, and that quality that made people trust him without thinking twice. When we started dating, I never once doubted that it would last forever. The night he proposed to me was something out of a fairy tale. We were in the same park where we had shared our first date. The flowers were in bloom, and the sun was just beginning to set, casting everything in a warm, golden glow. It felt like the world was in sync with my heartbeat quickening, thumping with anticipation. "I want to spend every day of the rest of my life with you," he said, kneeling down in front of me, holding the sparkling diamond in his hand, its brilliance almost blinding. I could hardly breathe. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. The tears welled up in my eyes, and I didn't even have the words to say. All I could do was nod, smiling like I was in a dream. "Yes," I whispered, and he slid the ring onto my finger. It was the most beautiful moment I could imagine. I felt on top of the world, and I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that nothing would ever come between us. Not time, not distance, not life. We were going to grow old together. But what I didn't know was that this moment was the beginning of the unraveling. The wedding planning was everything I had ever dreamed of. I dove into every detail, from the flowers to the music to the perfect dress. Cole and I spent hours discussing every small decision, agreeing on almost everything. Of course, the one thing I didn't have to worry about was my maid of honor, Lara, my best friend, my sister in everything but blood. She had been with me through thick and thin. We'd been inseparable since we were little, and I couldn't imagine having anyone else by my side on such an important day. But then there were the small things, the things that I brushed off that started making me uneasy. It was the way Cole was always so eager to help Lara out with little things. Late-night phone calls, the random trips to the store to help her with wedding supplies. I dismissed it. I mean, what's wrong with being a good guy, right? They'd been friends long before I'd come along. I told myself it was normal and I didn't think twice about it. But then came the texts. I remember it clearly. It was the evening before one of our final wedding meetings. I was sitting in our living room, flipping through the wedding magazine for the 100th time. The house was quiet, too quiet. Cole was in the study, probably working on one of his projects. I pulled out my phone, intending to send Lara a text about the last-minute details for the rehearsal dinner. But then I noticed something. A notification popped up from a number I didn't recognize. I unlocked the phone. The text was from Lara. "Cole has been acting weird lately. He's been so distant." That alone stopped me cold. What the hell? Why was Lara texting me about my fiancé? I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keys. I was about to put the phone down when another notification popped up from Lara. This one was more concerning. "Just wanted to check on you. I'm so excited about the wedding. And please, if anything feels off, let me know. I'm here for you always." I frowned. Why would she say that? Of course I was excited. Everything was perfect, or so I thought. At that moment, I should have confronted Cole. But the wedding was days away, and I was too overwhelmed to think clearly. So I ignored the nagging feeling in my stomach and went back to planning, assuming it was just wedding stress. But that night things changed. It started with a text from Cole, simple, direct, no context. It read, "Sophia needs our support. I'm moving in with her." At first, I thought it was a joke, but then the next message came, and the floor beneath me seemed to drop away. "She's pregnant. We have to be there for her." I felt as if someone had yanked the ground from under me. My heart skipped a beat, then thudded painfully in my chest. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing. Sophia. She was my sister, the baby of the family. We were close, or so I thought. I could feel the weight of his words like a physical punch. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just a random comment. This wasn't just a casual revelation. It was a declaration that shattered everything I had believed about my life. The man I loved, the man I was about to marry, had just told me that he was moving in with my sister because she was pregnant with his child. I didn't flinch. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. Instead, I sat there, staring at the phone, trying to hold my breath together. My mind was racing, my thoughts scattered, but somehow, the only thing I could focus on was the overwhelming sense of betrayal. The silence in the room was deafening. I felt as though my whole world had just crumbled at my feet, but I refused to let the devastation show. Instead of confronting Cole right away, I kept my composure and walked calmly to the kitchen. I told myself I would stay cool, take some time, and process this. I had to think, plan. There was no way I was going to let this slide. I didn't have a choice. There was a strange, almost robotic calm that came over me in the moments after reading that text. I could feel the anger bubbling beneath the surface, but I shut it down, focusing instead on what needed to be done. I couldn't let emotion rule my decisions. I had worked too hard to build everything I had with Cole, and I wasn't going to lose it all because of one careless mistake, one moment of weakness. I had to make sure he understood that betrayal in any form had consequences. As I stood in the kitchen, staring out the window, I could hear Cole moving around in the other room. He was probably oblivious to the bomb he'd just dropped on our relationship, thinking that I would just accept his news, that I would fall in line like I always had. He didn't realize that I had been quietly building my own escape plan long before this. That's the problem with taking someone for granted. You think they'll always be there. You think they'll forgive you. But I wouldn't, not this time. I took a deep breath and picked up my phone again. The message from him was still sitting there, glaring at me. I typed out a response, trying to keep my emotions in check, but it was impossible. How could I keep calm when everything had just been ripped away from me? He had cheated with my sister, and he expected me to act like everything was fine. I pressed send. Congratulations. It wasn't the response he was expecting, I was sure of it. I wasn't angry, not yet. But I would be. I couldn't react like some hysterical woman who'd just been hurt. I needed to think. I left the kitchen and went to the living room, sitting on the couch as the weight of the situation slowly sank in. My fingers trembled slightly as I reached for my glass of wine, the only thing that could help steady my nerves at the moment. The warmth of the alcohol spread through me, but it did nothing to numb the ache in my chest. The betrayal felt like a physical wound, sharp and relentless. I was used to being the calm, collected one, the one who could handle anything life threw at her. But now I wasn't sure who I was anymore. Everything I had worked for, everything I had built with Cole felt meaningless in an instant. My mind kept flashing back to those texts. She's pregnant. We have to be there for her. My younger sister, the girl I raised, the one I'd trusted with everything, had done this to me. And my fiancé, he had allowed it to happen. Why hadn't I seen it sooner? The signs were all there, the late-night calls. The way Cole would always just check in with Sophia, making sure she was doing okay. How many times had he brushed off my concerns, telling me I was overreacting? How many times had I trusted him, believing in the man I thought I knew? He was my partner, my confidant, the one I'd planned a future with. But it was all a lie. The phone buzzed again, and my heart skipped a beat. I almost didn't want to check it, but I did anyway. This time, the message was from Lara, my maid of honor, my best friend, the person I thought would always have my back. She had no idea what I had just discovered. I didn't want to burden her with this, but something told me I needed to talk to someone. Hey girl, just checking in. How are you feeling? I know the wedding is getting close and things must be hectic. Need anything? I stared at the text, her friendly tone almost mocking in light of what I had just read. Did she know? Did she suspect anything? Could she feel the tension in the air? I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I put the phone down and stared at the blank TV screen, trying to calm the storm in my head. The tension was building inside me, the need for a response growing stronger by the minute. But I knew I couldn't let it out yet, not until I was sure of everything. I had to outsmart him. The next morning, everything felt off. I was still reeling from the night before, but now I had to make the decision on how to move forward. I knew it wouldn't be easy. I couldn't just confront Cole and ask him to explain himself. He wouldn't tell the truth. He was already too deep in his lie. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection, trying to come to terms with what had happened. I looked like the same woman, but I felt different. There was a part of me that still couldn't believe it. How could I have been so blind? As I was brushing my hair, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Cole. The text was short and to the point. "Can we talk?" I knew that meant he was ready to explain himself. He probably thought I would listen to his excuses, believe his lies, but not this time. Instead, I picked up the phone and called Lara. It was time to get the truth. "Lara, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. The days that followed were a blur of mechanical routine, each one dragging longer than the last. I went through the motions, greeting Cole with forced smiles, pretending everything was okay, while a storm raged inside me. He had no idea what was coming. He thought he could still control the situation. He thought I was weak. But I was. I couldn't let him have any idea that I knew. Not yet. The silence between us was deafening. Cole would attempt small talk, asking how my day had gone if I needed anything, but the words felt empty. I couldn't bring myself to look at him the same way anymore. Not after everything. Not after the betrayal. Instead of confronting him, I focused on the things I could control. The wedding was in a few short weeks, and despite everything, I still had a million details to sort out. The invitations were already sent, the venue confirmed, but now it felt like everything was tainted. I couldn't cancel the wedding without looking like the foolish one, but I also couldn't go through with it while the man I was supposed to marry had been with my sister. So I played the part, pretending to be the bride-to-be everyone expected me to be. And as I did, the plan slowly began to take shape. Lara called the next day, just as I had anticipated. She had no idea what had happened between Cole and me, but she sensed the distance. "Annabella, what's going on?" she asked, concern lacing her voice. "You've been so distant lately." I paused, wondering if I should tell her, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I had everything in place. "Nothing's wrong, just the usual wedding stress," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "You know how it is." She didn't seem convinced, but she didn't press me further. That was Lara, always understanding, always willing to give me space when I needed it. But that also made it harder. I needed her now more than ever, but I had to keep her in the dark. As soon as we hung up, I turned to the next part of my plan. I knew that Cole thought he had the upper hand. He thought he had won. But what he didn't know was that I had already taken the first steps to make sure he would lose everything. I took my phone and opened the messaging app. I hadn't replied to him yet, but I knew it was time. I needed him to feel the heat, to think that everything was still okay. I needed him to believe that I was willing to forgive and forget. "We need to talk. I think it's time for us to figure things out. Let's meet tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m. I sent the message and set the phone down, leaning back in my chair. My mind raced with the possibilities. If he truly loved me, he would have already been the one apologizing. He would have been begging for forgiveness, doing everything to prove that he was sorry. But instead, he had been selfish, taking everything for granted, thinking I would always be there to clean up his mess. It was time for him to realize that I wasn't that person anymore. I was stronger than that. I had to make him see that the consequences of his actions were about to come crashing down on him. The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop early, my hands trembling with excitement. This was it. This was the moment where everything would change. I had already told Cole to meet me here for what I called the conversation. I didn't want him to know the full extent of my plan. I wanted him to feel like he was still in control, just for a little while longer. The bell above the door jingled as he walked in. He looked so calm, too calm, like nothing had ever happened. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. And his hands were stuffed in his pockets as he sat down across from me. "Annabella, I'm glad we're finally talking," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "I've been trying to figure out how to fix things." I forced a smile, meeting his gaze, making sure my expression was unreadable. "I'm glad too, Cole," I said, "but we both know this isn't something that can be fixed with just a few words." The silence between us stretched, and I could see the doubt start to flicker in his eyes. He didn't know what to say, and that gave me all the power I needed. I wasn't going to beg for answers. I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction of seeing me vulnerable. "I've been thinking," I said, pausing to gather my thoughts. And I realize something now. You made a choice and so did I. His expression shifted just slightly, but I could see the panic start to set in. What do you mean? He asked, his voice suddenly tight. What choice did you make? I leaned forward, my eyes locking onto his. I made the choice to take control of my life, to stop letting people, especially you, dictate my happiness. His jaw clenched, and I knew he was trying to keep his cool. You're being irrational, Annabella. We can work through this. We can get past it. I shook my head, my eyes never leaving his. No, Cole, you've crossed a line. And now I'm the one who gets to decide how this ends. You'll never control me again. His face paled as the words sank in. He had thought he could walk away from this with no consequences. He had thought I would just forgive him, that I would let him back in. But he didn't know what was coming. You don't get to walk away from this, I said, my voice cold. Not this time, it's over. That night I made the call. To my lawyer, to the bank, to everyone I needed. I wasn't going to let Cole and my sister get away with this. I was going to make sure they both knew the price of their betrayal. I wasn't going to let Cole think he could have everything, the love, the life, the security, without facing the consequences. It was time for him to learn that the rules had changed, and I was the one in control now. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was truly free. Days turned into weeks, and my life was anything but peaceful. It felt as though everything was moving in fast forward while I stood still, analyzing every angle, every possibility. James's desperate attempts to get back into the house were becoming more frantic, and I was prepared for what was to come. But deep inside, there was this gnawing uncertainty, something I hadn't expected, the toll it was taking on me emotionally. The entire situation felt like a storm I had no control over, and yet I had the power to guide it. I had already taken the necessary steps, securing every asset I had, freezing all accounts, and making sure James couldn't touch a single thing that I had worked for. But there was still one part of me that felt the loss, not just the material things, but the years I had spent loving someone who clearly didn't deserve my trust. I had spent so much of myself on him, hopping, believing that everything we had built was worth fighting for. When James's lawyer called me for the first time after everything had fallen apart, I couldn't help but wonder just how far he thought he could go with this. Sophia, your husband's attorney here. James has hired us to make sure the house stays in his name. He's entitled to half. You can't just freeze everything and cut him off. I didn't need to think twice. I had prepared for this. There was no way I was going to let him or his attorney manipulate the situation into something that suited their narrative. The house, the business, the money, they were James's to claim anymore, not after what he'd done. He'd broken my trust, betrayed me in the worst possible way, and now he would pay for it. I reached for my phone and dialed my lawyer's number. My hand was steady as I spoke with her, giving clear instructions on what to do next. The law was on my side. The house was in my name, and there was no way James could take that from me. It was time to make him realize that his manipulative ways weren't going to work on me. Within hours, I had started the process of filing for divorce, and that afternoon, I had the locks changed. James had no idea that while he was scheming to get back into my life, I had already set everything in motion. I had made my plans months ago, anticipating his every move. I was ready. The evening after the lock change, I sat at the kitchen table, sipping a glass of wine. The phone was silent for a while, but it didn't last long. A text came through. Sophia, I know you're upset, but we need to talk. We need to figure this out. I didn't even bother responding immediately. My lawyer was already handling the paperwork. It was done. The divorce was filed. The house was mine. And James, well, he could keep playing the victim, but I knew the truth. I had been the one who carried the weight of everything, and now I was done. The next morning, just as expected, James tried to call. He wanted to talk, to convince me that everything would be fine if I just listened to him. But I wasn't interested in hearing it. His betrayal had been too deep, too hurtful. There was nothing he could say that would make me change my mind. And yet, when I picked up the phone, I didn't feel anger. I felt something more calculated, more dangerous, a calm resolve. Sophia, he began, his voice dripping with that familiar charm. "I'm sorry, okay? I messed up, but we can fix this. We can still be a family." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for. "James," I said, keeping my voice even, "you've had your chance, and now you're out." The silence on the other end was deafening. I could almost hear him scrambling to find the right words, but there were no words left that could save him now. I stared out the window, watching the world move around me. I knew James was on his way to the lawyers, probably trying to throw in the towel and settle. But I wasn't interested in a quick fix. I wanted him to feel what I had felt, the sting of betrayal, the reality of losing everything he thought he could control. The phone buzzed again, and I didn't bother looking at the screen. I had already blocked him. His attempts to get back into my life didn't matter anymore. His game was over. It wasn't long before the lawyers were in touch again. James's attorney wanted to discuss settling, but I knew they were just trying to buy time. They had nothing to stand on. Nothing had changed. I was still the one who held all the cards, and James was still trying to manipulate his way out of the mess he had made. "Sophia," my lawyer said, "they're offering you a financial settlement to close this quickly. What do you think?" I smirked, sitting back in my chair. "I don't want money, I want justice." The days blurred together after that call. I had reached the apex of everything I had ever worked for, but in some twisted way, it didn't feel like a victory. Sure, I had built my empire. I had secured the house, the business, and my independence. But there was this hollow space within me, an emptiness that lingered in the corners of my heart, echoing with the betrayal that had brought me to this point. I had lost my husband, my family's trust, and a part of the person I once was. But I wasn't about to let that stop me. I wasn't going to let James or anyone take anything from me ever again. The final blow came when James made his last, desperate attempt to regain control. He thought he had played all his cards right, that he could use his charm and manipulation to get me to fold. He thought I would back down and let him crawl back into my life as though nothing had happened. But there was no crawling back. I wasn't that woman anymore. I could feel his presence lingering, even though he had long since stopped texting or calling. He was still hanging around, trying to turn the tables, trying to manipulate the situation in his favor. I had a sinking feeling that he was plotting something, probably trying to move back in with Emily or appeal to some old family members, but none of it mattered to me anymore. I had moved on, built my future, and the road ahead was clearer than it had ever been. The phone buzzed again in the middle of the night, and I groggily checked the screen. It was an email from my lawyer. The subject line was blunt, "Final offer from James." I sighed, rubbing my temples. This was it, the endgame. James had sent one final offer, trying to pull the last of his strings. His words were desperate, but calculated. It was clear to me now that he had finally realized the weight of what he had done. "Sophia, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. Please, let's just fix this. I'll make everything right. Let's talk one last time." I laughed bitterly as I read the words. Fix this? He was still delusional enough to believe I would drop everything and just forgive him. After everything he had done, the cheating, the manipulation, the gaslighting, this was his last-ditch effort to salvage what was left of his pride. His tone had shifted from the confident, smug man I knew to someone who was stripped bare of all the power he once thought he had. I closed the email without responding, leaning back in my chair as a strange sense of satisfaction filled me. This was my moment, the one where I took back my life. I was no longer a victim, no longer a woman who allowed herself to be trampled over by those she loved. I had learned, and I had grown, and now it was time to turn the page. The next morning, I walked into the boutique, as I had been doing for the past few months. The business was thriving, even better than I had imagined. I was still in shock about how quickly everything had changed, how far I had come. The employees greeted me with warm smiles, and I returned them with the same energy, knowing that I had built this. Every step, every decision, every sleepless night had led me here. I could hear James's voice in the back of my mind, but it was fading, a distant echo of a life I had outgrown. Around noon, the phone buzzed again. This time, it was from a number I didn't recognize. The moment I answered, I immediately recognized the voice. "Sophia," Emily's voice trembled. "I need to talk to you." I could feel the familiar pang of frustration building up in my chest, but I kept it in check. I needed to finish this, once and for all. "I know what you're going to say, Emily, and it's not going to work. James made his bed, now he has to lie in it," I said, my tone cold but controlled. There was a pause on the other end. I could hear her breathing, the sound of her trying to steady herself. "He's not the man I thought he was," she whispered. "I see it now, Sophia. He used me. He used us both. I thought he would change, that he'd be different with me. But it's all a lie. I see it now." The words stung more than I had expected. Emily wasn't just apologizing, she was awakening to the reality that I had already known. James had used her, just like he had used me. The difference was, I had learned from the experience. She hadn't. She had yet to experience the true cost of his betrayal. I took a deep breath. "I know, Emily, and it's okay, but you need to take responsibility for your choices, just like I did for mine. You don't need James to figure things out. You're better off without him." There was a quiet sob on the other end before Emily spoke again. "I don't want to keep living like this. He left me, Sophia. I don't know what to do anymore." I didn't have the heart to give her pity. "You'll figure it out, just like I did. You have a future, Emily, and it's time you realize that without him." After hanging up, I stood there for a moment, letting her words sink in. I realized something then. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was giving Emily a chance to rebuild hers too, but only if she could accept responsibility for the choices she made. The same choices that had destroyed her future and ruined mine. But in that moment, I couldn't care about her any longer. I had done enough for her. Now, it was her turn to take the reins. I looked out the window, feeling the weight of everything lift off my shoulders. The battle was over. The war had been fought, and I had won. And James, he had lost. I had taken back everything. And now I was free.